Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca Maximé, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Rerooted podcast on the Be Here Now network. It is the 13th of June as we are recording this, and I am here with a couple of very special guests that I'm so happy to have join us. First one is Father Greg Snyder. He is a priest and Zen Buddhist Dharma teacher at the Brooklyn Zen Center, and he's also the senior director and assistant professor of Buddhist studies at Union Theological Seminary here in Manhattan in New York City. And we're also joined by senior Zen student at the Brooklyn Zen Center, Jozen Gibson, who's also a Dharma teacher trainee with the Insight Meditation Society, which is a 4-year training program, I believe. And really grateful to have them both here today to talk about some of the work that they're doing at the Brooklyn Zen Center around undoing patriarchy and oppression. And the group that they have here that we're going to sort of discuss a little bit and about what they're unpacking in this group is this monthly group of Zen practitioners who identify or are identified as male, coming together to explore the construct of patriarchy, its impact on our lives, our communities, and to work toward developing our sacred masculine identities. Just pausing there for a moment. Our sacred masculine identities. Those dynamic and restorative aspects of masculinity that strengthen our ability to cultivate wisdom, compassion, and community. And in the group, they contemplate what the cost of patriarchy has been for the lives of everyone along the gender spectrum. How does patriarchy obstruct the expression of a sacred masculine identity? Could the expression of a sacred masculine identity lie at the very heart of undoing the violence of patriarchy in our sanghas, our group gatherings as Zen practitioners or as any kind of mindfulness practitioner really in communities? And I just want to welcome you both. Thank you so much for being here with us on Rerooted.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, now that we've gotten that all out of the way, talk to me, brothers. What's happening? No, really, it's a beautiful thing to be able to discuss this with folks who are actually doing the work and kind of unpacking all of the different levels that it brings. And so I think maybe the discussion today can be sort of multi-layered, and I'm sure it'll go in a million directions, but sort of what is patriarchy as sort of the template for oppression or of oppression that we often see, and how does that play out in all the other isms? How boys as children are cut off from the ways of sort of being more maybe intimate or vulnerable, or things that might be inherently things that could sort of disrupt patriarchy. What are the ways in which we have internalized patriarchy? And you speaking as men here around this, as opposed to me speaking in this way. And then also kind of taking some responsibility or checking into what's happening with things like Me Too and how patriarchy plays out, and how as embodied beings, there's this way of relating that gets interrupted perhaps with female bodies or female identified bodies because of or through patriarchy. If that sounds okay, and I'll let you guys open it up, and whoever wants to start can begin and go for it.
That's big. Let's see, I'll just say a few things about, and then open up for Jozen, but a few things about how patriarchy becomes a model. And really anytime we're talking about power and domination, which I think is what patriarchy set the template for, and all the other forms that it expresses, that domination expresses itself. But if we think about it, when we're young, right, all of us learn roles. And we learn all kinds of roles. Most of those roles are fluid. But there are a certain number of roles when it comes to our patriarchal identity or races, or the way racialization happens, where the roles are not permitted to be fluid. And that's usually because they have to do with power. So the way society regenerates power relationships requires that certain roles training that we get are not held as fluid, but are held as solid, are held as what we are all of the time. So I won't go into it, be later talk about, how this feels as a boy and what men do to boys and how that keeps happening. But I think that's the thing that we have to look at within a Buddhist context. So we're doing this particularly within a Soto Zen Buddhist environment, where we're always looking at how we hold solid views of self and how that causes us suffering. In certain ways, this work is no different from any of the other work. It just has deeper, more profound, and often more terrifying implications. Because when we're going into looking at the self that's constructed by patriarchy, it's not as simple as, okay, this became a way I do things because my particular parent did this to me at a particular time in a particular set of relationships. This is the whole ocean. This is how we completely understand relating to one another. So what am I when that's gone? When am I when I can't hang my hat on what it is to be a male that is in a privileged, dominating relationship to all other beings, especially a white male in relation to all other beings. So the unfortunate thing is we have to cut ourselves. Bell Hooks talks about this, that we trade in our humanity for privilege. And I think that's really what's at the heart of what we're trained as young boys, is that we're slowly trained in trading it bit by bit, pieces of our humanity, for the privilege that we get back for that trade. The trade ends up being a pretty terrible one in the end. That ends up in homicide, suicide, drug addiction, everything else. I mean, we can go on, but violence in so many forms. But it is the initial trade.
Yeah, this sort of Faustian deal, if you will, with giving up our giving up our real sense of possibility and connection and intimacy for this place of privilege, and it's kind of a bum deal in the end. Yeah, Jozen, you want to pick up there?
Oh yeah. There's a lot that's just shared and said, and even thank you for sharing our little piece on our website about what our group is about, in a sense, because it just reminds me of where we are in the group and the language that we use. And it has been a long conversation of how do we title our group, when is a good time to retitle our group based on what we're learning. So for example, even sacred masculine, right? We come to an understanding that even masculine or the feminine as words has us immediately thinking about the body in the binary in a particular way. And it's not honoring the fluidity that Greg is talking about. Right? And these sacred energies are fluid in nature. When we really understand them innately and inherently, they have nothing to do with the conditioned language that we have placed upon them in terms of masculine and feminine. However, those are words that we use to allow us to enter into our conditioned framework and our inherited dominance, our inherited violence, and the intersectionality of it all. And, being a Black male body, being a Black Japanese male body, my relationship to so-called privilege is very different than it is with Greg's, for example. I actually don't feel that same type of so-called privilege being in a Black male body, right, as a white male does. It's very different. And when we get into these conversations around male and female, right, what it means to be a man or a woman, we really have to recognize that culturally it's very different for so many of us, and that in itself informs and impacts the way that we express dominance and patriarchy. Right? So me as a Black man is very different. My expression of dominance and patriarchy is slightly different than it is for Greg, based on the way that I've been raised and based on what has been done to our culture for generations and generations, and why we're even here at this point having this conversation. Right? And finding the commonalities and finding the uniqueness, but understanding that it's all held in this drive to dominate and to oppress and to limit who we are inherently as human beings on this earth.
And what I love about your saying is, and what's coming up for me is this idea of sort of fear, and how, you know, sort of why would we be limiting, right? And why would we trade? Why would we make that deal, right? And it's been proven to kind of be a bad deal, right, for so many. Why do we continue to have this idea or this belief and cling to use the Buddhist, you know, sort of language of you know, craving or clinging as being one of the obfuscations, if you will, for I guess liberation, right? Moving freely, being freely, be collectively in the soup together, as opposed to I'm the carrot, you're the celery, stay away. You know, like, you know, we're not, right? How do we kind of just, like, you know, realize that we're in the same pot, quite literally, and how fear is sort of the thing that seems to keep on getting fed. Like that, you know, wolf analogy of which one grows, the one that you feed, the wolf that's
right.
And where does that fit in terms of being embodied beings, men in your case for this group? How does that get held and expanded? And then what sort of can be the possibility of, okay, so if I'm not going to be in this place of needing to dominate, needing to oppress, because there's a fear that if I don't, then I won't be in a position of privilege, which is the bargain that I've made. If I let that go, right? One of the many things we let go in practice. If I let that go, then what am I opening up to? Is it just uncertainty? Is it just a mystery? Is it something greater that I couldn't have imagined? Do I have to see for myself?
You know, I want to back up a little bit about on the trade, right? Because it is true that there's this kind of anxiety or fear around the trade-off of privilege. But alongside of that is most of us, not all of us, but most of us have had patriarchy beaten into us. And I'm not using that metaphorically. You know, if we expressed emotion as young boys, we were hit. If we lived out what wasn't the prescribed male identity, we were abused, humiliated, etc. So when one is up against that moment of how do I release, there is the privilege, but the privilege is so deeply, and this is where I think the current conversation actually loses sight of some of the embodied realities of what's going on, is the giving up of that privilege isn't just the giving up of the privilege. It's deeply enmeshed with, I will die.
Yeah.
Like, I will die. There's a 3-year-old boy that will die in those men. And so to actually be able to live down into that child whose life was threatened and who is acting in certain ways in order to preserve their own life. We all, I mean, until we're liberated, to use the language, until we're liberated from it, we're all carrying around traumatized children to greater or lesser degrees. And until we can feel into that, and for some of us, our embodiment keeps the trauma going into our adulthood, right? So that's, I think that's one piece of it. And then there is just the sheer fact that the only thing that I'm used to the privilege and the anxiety of giving up self or ego that comes with doing that. But I think that it's somehow we need to really look into how do we support that process together? How do we actually support people in, men in this case, in feeling into the terror of what it would be to not be in the world in the same way. Because you do trade off a lot. There's a lot that goes. And the way you're treated in the world, the men you can be around is much more limited. men you want to be around becomes much
Yeah.
more limited. You know, the world changes in dramatic ways. So that's a little bit that comes up when I think about the fear piece of it. I'm
I
sure
re-
Jozen, yeah.
no, I really appreciate that, and it just reminds me, and then I'm going to give it to you, Jozen, is that oftentimes in 12-step it'll be like that, right? You can't go
Yeah.
back to the same bar or hang out with the same friends or do the same things because you're going to be drinking, and that's not what you want to be doing, because you want to have a clear mind and you want to be more connected to yourself or others. So you are making then that new trade kind of based out of faith, really, that there will be something else on the other side, right? And that you use in that case of the analogy, alcohol or whatever compulsion that you were using to keep you going and survive something that was untenable previously. So we bow to that, recognize that it served its place or whatever it is and caused its own harms perhaps along the way. And then that's a process of letting go and unpacking and, allowing to kind of dissolve, but then moving into this new place of connection, but realizing that you're going to have to change up. It's going to change who you experience, how you experience, and what you experience.
Yeah, and that's the power of community. Right? You mentioned earlier Sangha, the community, how we come together and do this work together. Because that, again, that fear that we were talking about, that Greg mentioned, that you just mentioned, a lot of that fear is that we're alone and we're not going to be seen, we're not going to be heard. Right? The more we are able to be aware of our own inheritance, inhabitants, our expression of it. Is there anyone else out there that feels this way? Right? If I leave this group, am I going to then be a pariah back home? When I start speaking in a different way, when I start acting in a different way, right? Am I going to have to be then forced to then? See, I'm feeling that right now. That's my body, right? The code switching that we have to do so many times.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The communities in which we live in, the places that we grew up in that feel like home because it's with our family and the folks that we grew up with. But as we are growing and we are on our own separate paths, even though we're together moving, but we're all on our individual paths. And if there's one of us that then ends up going to Brooklyn Zen Center or another group because they're seeing something or feeling something that just doesn't mesh right with how they need to express a sense of love, or to explore love, or to explore self-care, whatever that may be, or just to be heard. Right? If they get to a point where they're saying to themselves, there's something that's just not right. And I'm in this group and I feel that something is just not right. And we're talking about it and I'm being challenged. And then I leave out of that space, I leave out of those doors and I go right back into the world where I end up being and spending 95% of my life. And I have to live in that code switched location. So how do I then bring what I'm learning and feeling out into that space, out into that world?
From the group out into
the group out into that space.
Yeah. So maybe an example from your own life of how that's happened, where you as a practitioner, not even as a teacher, but as a practitioner, as a student, as you said, maybe where that's happened, where there was this piece where it was informed by the collective and by the community. Because what came up for me is like sort of this strong silent type John Wayne embodiment of, Eurocentric, masculinity or individuation or meritocracy. Not that we don't all make our own efforts toward whatever it is that we're dedicating ourselves toward, right? Like we want to, like nobody else is going to clean my apartment. I need to do that, right? At the same time, that to have needs for men, it sounds like here, or to be in community might be, well, wait, I can't do this by myself. I should do this by myself, right? That's also maybe an embedded sort of message in there, and that part of what I think it was the language you used, Greg, is like terrifying, to kind of, change or switch or move toward this. So I'm curious, Jozen, if you could give an example of what that was like for you when you were in community, learning something, embodying this collective feeling of, maybe juiciness around some new learning or experiential, that then you went back out into the world and were like, how do I apply this?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
fit in?
That the felt sense of it was actually very familiar to the felt sense of being able to walk the streets and walk the world in a Black male body, and understanding the freedom to just walk in this body without fear, right? Without fear of being pulled over, harassed, shot, killed, whatever that may be, by just simply showing up in this body. So then there's this, within the group, it was a deeper understanding of, yes, I am in a male body, yet what does it actually mean to be a man in that sense? Right? And is it really being a man, or is it being a human being that is tapped into the innate capacity, the innate givings that are true to me? So what is it that's true to me, Jozen, in this larger context of community? And that's love, that's liberation, that's helping someone across the street. I'm a larger sized person, so understanding the size of me can be beneficial, right? I can carry certain things. There's an ability in my body that allows me to support people in that sense. So walking down the street and looking at someone just smiling, for example, right? It can be something that's simple, but it's also just me showing up and feeling very secure in who I am, right? This simple act of looking at someone and smiling, or just looking at someone and seeing them for another human being, right? And I'm saying it in this way because a lot of times we talk about how are we showing up in the world? Where do we go to work? What do we earn? We talk about these things in a material type of way. And for me, it was really about how am I showing up with people? How am I walking amongst people in this way? Am I looking at someone and is there judgment that's coming up? Can I not judge someone? Right? Can I see someone as an extension of me? Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I really appreciate that. Before we move on to maybe this other piece that you sort of talked about when you talked about the 3-year-old Greg, is there anything else you want to add to anything that's been offered so far?
You know, I was thinking when I was listening to you both talk, I was thinking that there's a process too that for me, that was affirming what was already there and what I already knew that wasn't affirmed by everything around me. Mm-hmm. So a shy, sensitive child that wanted to sit at a table of women and listen to them all the time, which was my tendency as a kid. You know, but that wasn't what was affirmed by the men around me. So there's already this, we already are this multiplicity, we already are this fluidity, and it gets killed off. We're born this, and it gets killed off by in this case patriarchy, and then what is it to remember back in and affirm something that humiliation taught you to hate?
Wow.
You know, and to actually feel back into that cycle and say, no, actually, those things that up until recently I hated myself for were when I was trying to be kind, when I was trying to be gentle, when I was intuitively leaning into appropriate responses to a very tender living world. And that was not easy. And it still happens. And to your question about, or to your point about, one of the hardest things I think is this idea that you're supposed to be able to support everything, you know, and that takes a long time to shed that one. That's a hard one to shed. And it's something I've been aware of for a very long time. And it's still such a strong inclination. And so I think
support everything individually.
Yeah, individually.
Yeah.
And so what is really helpful is to I mean, I think what's emerged in me, and this is another thing that is just remembering my childhood, because like someone you mentioned before, I forget who you mentioned, who went to the forest as a way of saving himself from what he was experiencing at home. That was my experience also.
Nature.
Yeah, nature. And so bringing oneself back to Mother Earth and really feeling, really taking seriously, I am going to go to the river. I recently went home for 3 days just to sit by the river I grew up next to, because my family's been there for 14, 15 generations along the Susquehanna. And so I just needed to sit there and learn. And I think that's remembering. It's kind of remembering through the violence.
Yeah.
And bringing that back again. Yeah.
That's so beautiful, and bringing in the metaphor of the river, the intergenerational and ancestral wisdom that's there, the remembering. I always love that word in terms of, sort of being, right, like sati, and coming back to, our wholeness, right? We're cutting off, right? The members are our embodiment, and then the remembering is that coalescing, and really sort of, it's already here, just got fragmented. I mean, if you use Dan Siegel's language, you talk about, the fragmentation and the dissociation. You can use the neuroscientific lens. You can use the, DSM-5, analyses, which I'm not a big fan of, but you could explain this sense of being pulled apart in many different ways. And then the whole point is the integration, right? Yeah. Or the cohesion, if not the integration, right? Some which is then, I guess, sort of dissolving into the essence of all that is, of which we were always a part, of which we can do, to what Jozen said, finally just drop into and actually feel that, and feel like, hey, it's okay to smile at this person because there's no difference, there's no separation. And I still need to make sure that if I'm in a strange place, I make sure that I know that when I'm crossing the street, I'm mindful.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so it's kind of the both and, or the and.
Yeah.
I think.
There's this, even when I was talking about smiling at someone, there's an inherent conditioning for me to smile in order to take care of that person. Right? Instead of really just smiling because we're here together as human beings.
Beautiful.
And in terms of what Greg was saying, there's a deeper listening, or what you were just mentioning, Francesca, there's a deeper listening from the body that's happening. It's a listening to deeply understand, not to respond, not to react, not to fix, but to really understand and come from that place of understanding. As Greg was saying, the appropriate response from there.
Yeah, the beingness.
The beingness.
Yeah,
yes.
I love that. Okay, so let's just kind of, as we are going through this conversation, maybe revisit this idea of the, I'm trauma practitioner and trauma healing practitioner, although I've been a trauma practitioner. I practice trauma really well. That boys being cut off from, the ways that we're raised, you alluded to it, the 3-year-old inside, and how much of that inner child work and recovery, how much can that be done in community, in group, in, meditation settings, maybe through psychotherapy or not, depending on who you're working with, or other kinds of healers, and the ways in which, if we can get there, even if it's a little terrifying, if we can kind of get there to be with that younger self, how that can be a portal to being more fully present and able to connect with other people now.
This is connected to the multi-lineages that we connect with, right? And what we bring together within our practice. There's a training that I went through a couple of years ago, indigenous focusing oriented therapy training, which has been completely powerful for me.
And I'm in that one too, so I feel you.
Yes. And it's dharmic in nature, right? It's really understanding the thread of dharma within all these teachings and our connections with the elements and with the earth. And one thing in particular to your question, it lets us reconnect with the inner child, whatever that child may be, whatever age they may be. And it's reminding us of something that's happening in the present, right? In particular, sometimes what that child may be reminding us is that we have survived this. right? We are here right now. I'm coming forward for you right now, however old you may be 20, 30, 40, 70, 80. But that inner child that is coming forward is reminding us we have survived this. What were the tools? What were the medicines that we did to survive this? Right? And we are powerful. We are love. I'm here to remind you that you are love in that sense.
Mm.
Yeah. And we identify as the trauma as being us. And if we can reshape that, reclaim our innate love, that right there has been completely, I shouldn't say completely healing, because I'm still going through that. But even that piece, our teachers were saying in that training that we are healed, but we have been blocked from that understanding of healing. Right? That there is a healing that's already there. So what's blocking that healing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And yes, it goes back to the remembering piece.
Yes.
So that little inner 3-year-old that was humiliated, Greg, to your point, really sort of finding a way to heal him or let him know that he made it.
Mm-hmm. Now, listening to Jozen, I was thinking about Buddha nature Tathagata, the same idea of like, we're already liberated. We just don't know it. We just don't know it. And when I was listening to your question about where do we go, what came up was all of it. We have to do all of those things, in a certain way. Whatever comes to us is the thing that's calling us. That's what we need to do. So for some reason, for some people, it will be very much a kind of familial, individual psychotherapeutic model.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't think that can do it alone, because I think it's too rooted in the individual in ways that are confusing to us as beings. So there's that piece of it, but my wife Laura is also in IFOT, so we have a circle here.
Mm-hmm. Yay, I thought.
But that way of what it brings up for me, and Jozen and I talk about this a lot, about living from ancestral mind, or I like to use I really like in the Chinese and the Japanese that the word shin is both mind and heart as one thing.
Mm.
And so when I say ancestral mind, I'm using it in that way, where it's also ancestral heart. But one thing that has been interesting and powerful for me as an experience is that when I am clearly seated in an ancestral mind, and I mean the sense that what's coming forward is multi-generational. I'm not identified with this little being that's going around trying to do things in a city that's very hard to do things in and all of that. But I feel ancestors with me. I feel Mother Earth with me. I feel the future of generations. Toxic masculinity cannot survive that. They just can't survive it. There's no place for it. It doesn't make a lick of sense in that space. So I think as we begin to realize that in a deep way, in a heartfelt way, which I hope is where we're going. There's clearly this very strong arising of toxic masculinity that we're seeing right now in positions of power and so on. But I'm really praying it's the death gasp, and that because we're going in another direction.
Mm-hmm.
And but I do feel as we connect more and more, and we have to survive, right? What's happening with Mother Earth and happening to the human species, we either wake up from this or we're done.
Right.
There's not a solution. There's no other solution anymore. So to ending patriarchy, I just don't see that there's another path.
Right. It becomes not so much like we need to end patriarchy because it's the right thing to do. It's like, no, it's actually the only solution for sustainability. Something that we're not just going to all live on Mars. It doesn't work that way. There may be beings out there, but yeah, we don't. Yeah.
We'll dominate another planet.
Yeah. Right. And so we're holding that, right? Like, and I think that's so beautiful. Is like, we have this body, we have this planet, we have this solar system, we have this galaxy, we have this universe, but who knows what else is out there? And so are we not just this, stardust and all that stuff at a one level? And then are we not just all of that has been also embodied in this nervous system that walks around and gets conditioned and gets programmed and can reprogram and remember, and, as you say, come back to what's already here and never was gone at all anyway. And so maybe on that point, shifting, I should say, to the piece about the internalized patriarchy, and then moving forward to the relational aspects of embodied females and sort of how embodied males interact with embodied females. But so the internalized piece and then the other piece, either way, whoever wants to maybe take on either of those.
The first time I met Greg, I walked in the Brooklyn Zen Center and I knew of Greg. Greg knew of me. And I walked in, I was the only...
I hope that's a good thing.
Well, this is where I'm going with that. Because I wasn't quite sure, right? I was going in with a very protective piece of me, that on one end it was honoring, and it's just what I learned to protect myself. And on the other end, it was me embodying and even expressing a form of toxicity that wasn't allowing me to meet palm to palm, heart to heart. And I went up to Greg and I said, hello. And before even Greg said hello, he said, thank you for being here. I know what it has taken for you to get here. I almost dropped to the floor and just started bawling at that point.
Well, it's giving me tears now.
That's how we met at Brooklyn Zen Center.
Beautiful.
And so we're talking about the expression of all these energies, the nurturing energy, the feminine nurturing energy. That's how Greg met me. There was no competition. There was no toxicity. There was only but love, acknowledgement, seeing, and an honoring of the history and honoring of even my own ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Would that we were all greeted that way and could meet ourselves that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could meet one another that way.
Yes.
And beautiful that you had that awareness. Or maybe it was just awareness, not awareness you had, but awareness reaching out, Craig, from you to Jozen.
Yeah, I remember that moment. And I remember Jozen coming in, and he felt totally trustworthy. So, and not everyone does, most people don't. So it was that. And I think, one thing, we can call this math. I agree with Jozen's earlier statement about being careful of masculine and feminine, even as identifiers. But one thing I notice, and this is my experience of Jozen that I just love so deeply, is one thing that happens when men start doing this work is they become more neurotic than they were before, because now they're starting to just hate themselves as men and they become kind of, one thing that can happen is they become kind of a curled up, nervous, apologetic being. And the groundedness that's possible by giving up all of that chatter that patriarchy has and misogyny has, that we've internalized from that training, giving that up, there's a ground that emerges, and just a real rootedness that isn't that curled up, nervous self-loathing being enacted. And that's what I appreciate about Jozen's expression in the world, is that there's both gentleness and this very upright, strong presence that isn't apologizing. And I think, and I feel that that's where we all need to be going. We all need to, whatever the body is, Loving, gentle connection, no apology for who I am. I had nothing to do with it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
None of us chose. So we did not choose the bodies we were born into or the places we come from.
Mm-hmm.
Some Buddhists would disagree with me on that. Some Hindus would disagree with me on that. But let's just say we didn't. And to live out that unapologetic gentleness, I think, is such a deep gift. Jozen does that for our whole community, and stronger because of it.
Beautiful.
I'm definitely stronger because of it. No question. To be able to live in that place and to embody it and to meet folks and to be in conversation in terms of what our respective capacities are to embody that, right? To embody that unapologetic being. And what is our expression of it? And I love to think of the expression of it as being artistic in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. And within our community, we have folks who are cooks, right? We have folks who are sewers, who are artists and musicians, writers, orators, whatever that may be, and providing space for all of us to express everything that we're talking about through creativity and through their origins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that real sense of possibility and creation and generative,
Yes.
Beauty, really,
Yes.
as a path to reconnection and to healing. And I really appreciate that. And so, as we begin to sort of wind down this conversation, although I'd love to continue it, I know we don't have forever, in this moment anyway. How do we move away then if we're sort of, the tendency in a male body might be, okay, well, now I'm waking, now I'm feeling really neurotic and apologetic and bad. Okay, I'm not going to necessarily want to get stuck there. That's terrifying. I don't want to go back to this like privilege thing where I'm, oppressing. At the same time, feeling a little unmoored. So I know community is here to support me. So that's good. And my creative arts and my places of, creating bounty are there too. But how do I show up now relationally with women? Now that it's Me Too, now that we're in this era where whatever, like what do I do? How do I do this?
The one thing that comes to mind is, and I think this takes a kind of imaginative discipline if it's been trained out of you. And that is to really do the work of, and you'll never fully understand, but really do the work of trying to understand what it is to be in this world as a woman. And to see what it is to walk down the street being harassed, to just know the violence that is nonstop, the discouragement, the undermining of one's confidence, just all of the things that are going on, and be present for that healing. I mean, we can say the easy things like don't talk this way and don't talk that, and sure, we should. There are the don'ts, right? And there are plenty of don'ts, and we shouldn't do them.
Don't do them.
Yeah,
don't do that.
Don't do the don'ts.
Don't condescend. Don't treat female-bodied people as if they're lesser beings. All of those kinds of things that we shouldn't do. But I think for me, the experience that is more healing is to really show up deeply underneath, lifting the ribs of women and support them in being human beings in a world that constantly dehumanizes women. Like, to be that support. And it's not prescriptive in the sense of, this is the situation, always do this. I don't think it's that simple. I think it goes back to what Jozen was talking about, of including a sense of body and connection and understanding what it is in a given moment and really attending. Which means that we have to build skill sets we might not have, relational skill sets that we might not have. And what you said earlier, Francesca, about relating to oneself. If we're in deep relationship to ourselves as beings, then we can be in deep relationship. We slowly begin to be in deep relationship with others. But especially if we're in relationship with what is traditionally considered feminine, and we start to really raise that up as something that is worthwhile and important and necessary. And then we're not so afraid of it in other people, and we're not so alienated from it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I have many more thoughts on that, but I'll stop.
Well, I mean, let's go to Jozen and then maybe we'll come back.
Yeah, it also informs the way that we show up for every human being. Trans women, trans men, gender non-conforming, whatever body that you're in, how do we show up that way if we are inheriting a male dominance, that men identified dominance has dominated all beings, right? And in particular the earth. And one thing that has been important for me to understand is not to expect someone to allow me in when I want them to allow me in. And to really tap into that craving, which is another form of dominance, right? Trying to force my so-called awokeness or enlightenment onto someone, right? Do you hear what I'm saying to you? I want you to hear what I'm saying to you. I'm apologizing to you. I'm apologizing for my man that's not listening to me. Right? No. Again, it's going back to this place of listening and appropriately responding from the body and meeting people where they are. And we're not always going to meet in the same time that's appropriate for each other. So understanding what that is. While, and I'll say this on the flip side, for someone to create some space for another to be redeemed, essentially. Because if we are actually doing this work, and if we ourselves have been harmed, can we meet someone and say, thank you for the work that you have been doing? And no, I'm not ready to engage with you on this level just yet. Or yes, I'm ready to engage with you. Let's talk about how that can be. But if we're doing that level of work that Greg is talking about, that we're all talking about, at some point, all that work is for us to be in community with one another, right? To therefore be in community with the earth and all the elements in that way. So we're doing this all for each other on behalf of all beings.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think, for any listeners who are sort of looking for some pithy 12-step program to like be nice to ladies, I don't know that that's what this podcast was about, right? Like, so it's just, and I guess I appreciate that because there's probably plenty of those out there. And I don't think that was what we needed to be doing here today, because I think that underneath those layers, which I think are necessary insofar as that, you need a bumper on your car, but you need an engine first. And that is kind of what this is about, I think. What's the driver? How do we get underneath the hood and really sort of, tinker with what's in there so that we can run smoothly again. Yeah. And be safe on the road.
That's right.
Yeah. Jozen and I were recently kind of laughing about the instinct toward creating rules. And that when things get really difficult, people just want to throw rules at them or 12 or steps at them or whatever it is. And it's not that those things are not useful, but I think we have to be really, really careful, because the mind of domination seeps in and then thinks, okay, I'm going to learn those things and now I have it. And now I'm going to bludgeon the world with my new feminist, anti-patriarchal wisdom.
Yeah.
And we've all seen this in many ways, So it's Yeah, it's funny. We're in a very capitalist, commodifying world where everything gets turned into steps, stages, and rules and regulations, and then the body and the mind and the heart doesn't really change. We just create new avenues for the same systems of domination to re-manifest in ways that now know how to talk the talk in a different way. It's so much slower and so much deeper and so much scarier and so much more confusing, and we don't have any idea.
One of the most powerful groups I've been in that are really working hard to embody what we're talking about, and you may be familiar, is the GRIP program, Guiding Rage into Power program at San Quentin. And this is a program that is designed for folks who are doing 20 to life, right? And to really understand the crimes that they committed, to understand the causes and conditionings that they embodied up to that point of the crime, to apologize, but they're apologizing in a way that they're not expecting anyone to receive the apology at all. And they're doing it in community. And it's this question of, if I get out, if I go back out into the world, how am I going to show up? What have I learned by the crime that I committed in a time that I have committed? What is all of that? And they're doing it in community and being very, very vulnerable with one another.
Mm. Beautiful.
And it is beautiful. It really is.
Well, and that just reminds me, it's like we're all on our path. We're all on a path. It's a question of whether or not we're aware that we're on a path, or that we have any intentionality around being on a path, or whether or not we are just sort of like being pathed onto, or whether or not we are walking, with some level of awareness, even if, again, we're just sort of setting the compass, even though we don't have some, fixed destination GPS here where we're locked in, for good, but that we're sort of orienting toward that which, if nothing else, is possibility, as opposed to prediction, and really being more okay with what that means. Because as you're saying committed, I'm like, well, yeah, they're committed, but they're committed. And what are we committed to?
Right.
And can we make a new commitment to something else? So, gentlemen, is there anything else you'd like to share about what we've discussed, about the Brooklyn Zen Center and your particular offering? Any other offerings that you may have, like you just said, about the GRIP program, that you feel are places that not be in directly your purview, but things that you feel other people might want to know about? Anything else?
I'll just say something. If there happens to be a man who hears this, listens to this, and is scared to death or teetering on whether they want to do this work or whatever, what is on the other side is the deep connection of one's birthright as a human being in the world. And there is just no amount of power. There is no amount of privilege or domination. There's just nothing that will ever substitute for that. And the gift of being able to be with everyone who comes in the room as a human being, everyone, and that they can be with you as a human being without the bullshit of our histories of violence constantly, unconsciously intervening. They'll be there, but we can be intimate and loving with them too. And that can be the gateway of our connection too, also. It doesn't have to be the division all the time. And I would just encourage people to move beyond that terror to what's on the other side. Because in the end, cliche or not, it's all going to be love. That's the only thing that's going to save this species. It's just it.
Beautiful. I think your puppy concurs.
Yeah, I was worried about that.
Here, here, says the pup. And Jozen, anything to add here as we close?
I completely agree. Nothing more to add there. The only thing is we are pulling together a resource list of what has supported us as a group at Brooklyn Zen Center. And that will be on our website shortly within the next couple of weeks. And those are good guiding points for anyone who has been doing this work for some time or completely new for this work. Yeah. Resources are very important. Yeah.
They sure are, and I will share this with folks, and really just a lot of gratitude for your practice, your intention, your embodiment, your willingness to share and express, and I don't know, just to kind of show, if nothing else, that hey, there's some of us out here doing this, and if you didn't know, or that this is an option, or that this might be a way. That there's a lot of food out there, and this is also on the buffet, and maybe you want to try it. So appreciate your offering and your invitation to do that. It's deep work, and I do think in many ways, however many people are able to engage locally in Brooklyn in your particular Sangha, perhaps by sharing this, it plants a seed for other people to perhaps consider and invite what might be a way that they could do some of this in their own communities.
That's right.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Take good care and be well.
Francesca. You too.